All right, let's get the very latest with SABC News US correspondent Sherwin Bryce-Peace. Sherwin, a very good afternoon to you. So, of course, it is that massive homegoing memorial yesterday. Give us a reflection of how that actually went down and talk to us about the funeral proceedings today of the late Reverend Jesse James in Chicago. Any sign of Cyril Ramaphosa among the mourners yet? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon to you, Alicia. And of course, I mean, if you watched part of that public homegoing ceremony at the House of Hope, a 10,000-seater arena in the city of Chicago in the state of Illinois in the United States, you will have understood the vibrancy, the emotion, and the exceptionalism that is associated with the sending off of this nature, right? And to use an old reference about what the Black church means in moments like this, it's obviously going to be a long day because there are music performances, there are multiple speeches. We had 3 former presidents in the room in the likes of former President Joe Biden, Barack Obama, and Bill Clinton, all of whom spoke in addition to the presidential nominee for the Democratic Party in the last election, the former Vice President Kamala Harris. So you can understand with the great esteem that was attributed here, not just to the loss of Jesse Jackson, but to the life that he lived. And of course, there were those moments where you had the political overtones coming through, right? I'm sure you saw the clip of former President Barack Obama saying things like, each day we wake up to a new assault in our democratic institutions, another setback to the idea of the rule of law, an offense of common decency. Every day we wake up to things you just didn't think was possible. But then what does he say? But this man, and he points to the coffin, the Reverend Jesse Louis Jackson, inspires us to take a harder path. His voice calls on each of us to be heralds of change, to be messengers of hope, to step forward and say, send me whenever we have a chance to make an impact. And I think that was the message from the likes of Barack Obama. The former President Joe Biden also spoke about, let us be what Jesse Jackson called us to be, a margin of hope, and lift up the country, stand up and finish the job. And I think that is the inspiration taking forward into the more private family homegoing ceremony today. That was, of course, a public event where there was a first come, first served basis. Anybody who was free and able to go was able to enter that ceremony. But today, where President Cyril Ramaphosa will be among the keynote speakers, Alicia, he will, deliver what one imagines will be the linkages that, the life of Jesse Jackson represented, not the linkages only between Chicago and cities around the world, but also the United States and places like South Africa, a freedom fighter in his own right, a civil rights icon that played a very critical role in the transition from apartheid to democracy in South Africa. And so you'll begin to hear from President Ramaphosa when he does speak later today, about those linkages, what Jesse Jackson meant to South Africa. I recall that Jesse Jackson was among the welcoming committee that planned former President Nelson Mandela's first visit before he was president. He was deputy president of the African National Congress when he made his first visit to the United States in the early 1990s. And Jesse Jackson, along with David Dinkins, who was then the mayor of New York, and Harry Belafonte, they were part of the welcoming committee. So there is a very deep history in the relationship between the African National Congress in particular, but South Africa more broadly, and the Jackson family. And I think that sentiment is certainly going to be carried forward when President Ramaphosa takes to the podium later today. And another president from Africa among the guest list that I've seen, Alicia, Felix Tshisekedi, the DRC president, is also, based on the program that I've seen, expected to speak today.
It's going to be a long day indeed, Sherwin. And while you bring out those political overtones as well as the significance of the Black church, I mean, it must have been quite a logistical and security nightmare to organize this massive funeral and memorial yesterday, being attended by, as you said, the world's top leaders. How have the South Side residents actually reacted to this hive of activity within their backyard with the presence of liberals in their midst, to note?
Let me read you a little bit about what J.B. Pritzker, the governor of the state of Illinois, is also a Democrat. This is democratic country. I mean, the roots of the Democratic Party in a state like Illinois are quite deep. And he made this connection. He talked about, every day Jesse Jackson would honor us the way we are honoring him today. I mean, you had a packed 10,000-seater church at the House of Hope that tells you about the stature of this man, right? He met with kings and queens, presidents, etc. But here in Chicago, said J.B. Pritzker, he was our neighbor. He was our friend. He brought enormous pride to the people of the state and the city. Reverend Jackson belonged to Chicago, and Chicago belonged to him. Let's follow in his footsteps and be trailblazers and not pathfinders. And I think that sentiment, that J.B. Pritzker, the governor of the state of Illinois, is emblematic of what you see in Chicago today, and the outpouring of grief and love and respect for the Jackson family, and what it was that J.C. Jackson represented. Remember, this was not just a freedom fighter and a civil rights fighter. This is someone that took that legacy and built on it. You know, in South Africa today, Alicia, we often talk about having achieved political freedom, but not yet having achieved economic equality and freedom for everybody. And I covered a story that J.C. Jackson headlined here in New York in 2017. His Rainbow Push organization had an event called the Wall Street Summit, and it was this link between political freedom and economic freedom. And I want to read you two quotes that I did in that story that I went back to just look at. And he says, "We've achieved freedom. Now we must achieve equality, and that meant not only access to the right to walk down the street and use public accommodations, but access to capital and industry and technology. Locked out, we were denied the right to learn the science of capital development, so we've globalized freedom. Now we must globalize equality." I mean, that kind of statement in 27 even resonates today. He also said, how do we get inclusion? Knock on the door, buy shares of stock, or sometimes fight, picket, and protest. But at least when you're fighting for economic justice, you're fighting the right fight. And the good news is that everybody wins. The people who are locked out, the lockout represents market, money, location, and growth. So even though there are fears about letting the walls down, when you replace the walls with bridges, everybody wins. So when you ask me about the love that the people of Chicago have for J.C. Jackson, look at his words and tell me how you cannot.
We're going to leave it there. Sherwin, thank you so much for that update. That is SABC News US correspondent Sherwin Bryce-Peace with an update on the late Reverend J.C. Jackson's funeral taking place today.